So we're really happy to have Professor Julia Reimer with us. She is an associate professor at Hamline University in Minnesota, where she teaches at the TEFL certificate and the Masters of Arts in TESOL programs. She's taught English to learners in Spain and the US, and she regularly provides professional development for practicing teachers. Her areas of interest include genre-based approaches to teaching grammar, online language teacher education, and the writing of low literacy learners. So here to speak with us today with the presentation, Polish Up Your Language Magnifying Glass, Close Reading Tools to Unlock Authentic Texts. Please help me welcome Professor Julia Reimer with a warm virtual round of applause. And so if you have your cameras on, give a thumbs up, wave your hands, say hi to
Thank
Julia in the
you.
chat. There you are.
Nice to meet you. Nice to see you all. While I'm pulling up my screen, I just have to share, as I've shared with Mark before, when I have a special place in my heart for this, for the Mark Twain Library, because when I was in, fourth grade, seventh grade, my family lived in Costa Rica for a couple of years. And the only place that we could get English language books to read was at the library. So this is particularly a joy for me to be able to sort of meet virtually, thanks to the Centro Cultural. So let me pull up my screen 1 second here. So you should be seeing a good. Okay. So yes, as Mark mentioned, I teach in Minnesota. I work primarily with teachers that are getting their English as a second language teaching license to teach in grades K through 12, although I also work with people who want to teach adults in the US as well as abroad. So you'll see as we're going through this session, a number of the texts that we'll be looking at are ones that are kind of academic texts, but just know that these are tools that can be used in a variety of different contexts too. So our objectives for this session, by the end of the session, I hope that you're able to define a little bit more what is meant by close reading, and that you'll be able to name and really think about ways that you might use close reading tools in your own practice. So tools that can help students to identify deeper meaning, identify text organization, identify author perspective, things like that. I put this little hand icon here because throughout the session, I'll be asking at a couple of different points for volunteers to help me model some activities. So think now if that's something that you'd like to do, and then I'll call on those of you who might like to volunteer. Okay, so we'll be looking at our agenda, kind of looking at what is close reading. Again, I'll do some demonstration of a few close reading tools. We'll have a short time for breakout rooms, and then we'll do some Q&A. I put this tiny URL link to the handout, but I'm also going to put it in the chat. Give me 1 second here, so that you can follow along with that. If you don't access it now, it's not the end of the world. I've got most of the texts available in other formats too. All right, so authentic texts. So my definition of authentic texts are texts that basically aren't written expressly for language learners, right? They're things that we find in the environment, in English-speaking contexts. So what I'd like you to do is think about some authentic texts that you use with your students, okay? Also think about some of the benefits of using authentic texts, some of the challenges. And what I'd like you to do is take a minute to think about that, and then type your message in the text box, but don't hit enter yet, okay? I'll tell you when I say go, then you can enter your, press enter so that your messages will pop up, okay? So let's take a minute to think about those questions. write your thoughts in the chat. And then when I say go, you can press enter and we'll see what pops up. Okay. All right, go. Hit enter. Let's see what we get here. So magazines, social media posts, poems, great, news articles, comic strips, brochures, maps, written news, blogs, ads, great. Yep, the newspaper, menus, stories. Excellent, excellent, right. And so if you think about, some challenges here, not all students understand English at an authentic level, Sergio. That's exactly right. We want to expose learners to these authentic texts, but oftentimes they're more challenging for learners. So my hope is that some of these tools will actually help learners to access these texts a little bit more. Part of that is that when we're looking at texts, we definitely want to look at vocabulary. We want to ask some sort of comprehension level questions, but we also want to move beyond that too, and we want to dig in a little bit more deeply. And then we also want students to take information that they get from authentic texts and, sort of be able to do something with that. So whether that's taking that information and transforming it to a different format, whether that's sort of making connections to themselves, making connections to other information that they know about, or using it as a springboard perhaps for their own writing, things like that too. So if we think about close reading, then I've got a bit of a definition here. Again, this is my definition, not necessarily everybody's definition, but for me, it's examining language features of a text to help students, again, determine deeper meaning, look at author perspective, look at text organization, all with the idea of deepening their comprehension, right? Deepening what they understand of the text and how the text works. And then, of course, if we're going to do close reading, this really requires pre-planning on the part of the teacher. It's not something you could just do off the cuff with a text, right? So some of the things that you need to take into consideration is, what are the features of that text that make it challenging to my class? And then thinking about, what activities can I use to draw learners' attention to these features? So, we really want to come at any grammar instruction that we do, any focusing on language features from a noticing perspective. So finding ways of helping learners kind of get those tools, those magnifying glasses, right, to look a little more closely at language that's in authentic texts. The other thing I'll say too, just sort of a little sub-theme here, is that I find close reading a really nice way to integrate grammar instruction along with reading instruction, so that we're not, it's really what's in the text that's driving our grammar instruction, rather than necessarily a predetermined set of grammar items that we want to cover. So again, it's kind of a nice way of bringing those pieces together. Another thing I'll say too is that not every single text is going to be appropriate for these close reading tools. An advertisement, for example, there's just not necessarily a whole lot of deeper meaning in there. Or, I'm thinking of like a grocery advertisement, right, that has the thing that's for sale and then what the price is, right? There's not a whole lot more we can go into in there. So we want to think about texts that provide some challenge for learners. Those are going to be the ones that we're going to choose and focus on. Okay, so the tools that we'll be looking at today, we're going to look a little bit at language functions and how considering those can help us figure out what to focus on in reading. We'll look at something called process participant analysis. We'll look at lexical chains, and we'll look at something called attribute charts. So some of these may be familiar terms to you, some of these may be familiar tools, but hopefully you'll find something new in here as well. And I'll just say again that these tools really encourage students to kind of notice the language. Yeah. So let's look at the first piece I wanted to talk about is language functions. And again, I'm sure that you're familiar with this term. It's really, a function is really kind of what we're trying to get done through language. And we oftentimes think of these in terms of speaking, right? So what I've got there on the left-hand side, interpersonal functions, a lot of these will sound familiar to you. You might be advising somebody, apologizing, greetings, introductions, making complaints. These are things, you know, in your curriculum materials, you may actually have functions listed that you're focusing on. I also want to point out that we can think about academic language functions as well. So things like comparing and contrasting, classifying, expressing cause and effect, sequencing, synthesizing, right? So these are other things that we might be trying to get done, particularly with academic texts. That's not to say that there isn't overlap between these two columns. And these certainly are not exhaustive lists. There are many more functions that we could think about as well. If you have the handout, if you linked to the handout, on the last page of the handout, you'll see these functions as well listed. So what I find helpful about thinking about language functions is that they can really help the learner to make sense of the author's purpose in writing this text and to find key evidence to support that purpose. So we're going to look at a text together here. And let's look first at this picture. I have to admit that it's been a long time, too many years, since I have taken science class. But this is actually modeling something or showing something that's called the rock cycle, which is basically how rocks break down, how they become different kinds of rocks, igneous rocks, metamorphic rocks, sedimentary rocks, sort of how volcanoes are involved in those as well, okay? So before looking at this text, we might want to spend time with learners, right? Just talking about what these different processes are. So if you've got the handout, you can read, this is text A on the handout, or you can see it here on the screen. What I'd like you to do is, let's just take about 2 minutes to scan through this text and think about what's the function, or there may be more than one function, but what's the function of this text? Okay, so again, take a couple minutes to scan through this. Okay, so yeah, feel free to, so we've got some folks already adding to the chat, analyzing the chronology of rock formation, explaining the steps in a process. Good. Any other functions that you see there? Explaining and describing. A lot of prepositions, talking about how volcanoes work, sequencing, cause and effect, informing. Good, exactly. All right, you'll see the little hand icon here. So I'm going to ask for, could 3 people volunteer to help me out with the task here? Just go ahead and put your name in the chat if you want to volunteer, and eventually I'll ask you to unmute yourself. We're a small group and I'm kind. So, okay, great. Sergio, thanks. I won't, nobody will be embarrassed in this task, I promise you.
Sergio, you can unmute now.
Sure.
There you are.
Anyone else want to join in on this one?
Oh, right. We need 3. I thought it was
more
sequential.
folks.
Okay. Yeah, anybody else?
Vicky, great.
All right, Vicky.
One more person. Aida, great. Okay, so Sergio, Vicky, Aida. Okay, let me go over to this other I'm hoping you're seeing a different screen here now. This is a Jamboard. I'm not giving you access to this at this point. I'm going to be the only person who's able to write in here, but I'm guessing you're familiar with this kind of technology where you can, I can highlight different things and that. And so if we were really doing this in the class, I would ask you to actually, as students, to get in here and do some of this. But so what we're going to do here is focus particularly on causes and effects. Okay. So my volunteers, Sergio, Vicky, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the last person.
Aida,
thank you. Let's scan through again and let's maybe work a bit together. One thing you'll notice in here is that usually when we talk about cause and effect, we oftentimes teach connectors like because, therefore, but there aren't that kind of connector in here. You won't find those. So we're going to need to look a little bit more to find out something that leads to something else, something that causes something else. So I'm going to find one here, and I'm going to use red to underline an effect. Okay. Here we go. They break apart. That's an effect. Okay, so can one of my volunteers here find some causes for this effect? What are some things that?
I could say that the rocks falling down from the most upper part.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of this part, rocks roll down mountains. That part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is rocks roll here? Good. Good. Okay. Vicky, do you see another effect? Doesn't have to be necessarily related to this cause, but do you see another effect?
Well,
can I say one?
Sure, of course, please.
Eventually melt.
Yeah.
Second line from below to.
Yeah. Eventually melts. Okay. And what leads to it eventually melting?
I could say heat and pressure. I believe. I'm not so sure.
Exactly. I think that's right. Gets hotter, right? Mm-hmm. It's maybe something about them getting buried too.
Yeah. A little bit above it says they're exposed to heat and pressure.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, and let's look at that exposed to heat and pressure. Do we find something else that happens when they're exposed to heat and pressure? Any of you can feel free to hop in.
They change into metamorphic rocks.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's see.
And what about sedimentary rocks are created?
Yes, good. Yeah, and that's our effect there. What's the cause of that one?
Sediment gathering.
Yeah.
Yep. Sediment gathers up. And kind of presses together and cements, right? Good. Okay. So let's talk about what shows us that this is cause and effect. Do you see any grammar pieces, any language pieces? Like I'm going to say, for example, let me get a pen here and I'm just going to, okay. I think this verb created, right? Or created. I think that is, that's somehow demonstrating a cause and effect. Any other words or phrases or structures that you see that?
Well, the connector as.
Yeah, exactly. This one right up here, right?
It's also both.
And also eventually.
Eventually.
Yes.
Yep.
It gives me the idea that something else comes next.
Exactly. Something happened before, and then this thing happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another one I see is change, right? Change into change. We got another as, right? It's kind of interesting because as oftentimes we think of that as showing time, right?
Yeah.
And it does show time.
Yeah.
I could say progression.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Progression. And in this case, resulting in something, right? Yeah. So what we could do too, I'm not going to necessarily do this, but we could, in our little cause and effect chart here, we could put rocks roll down, mountains, right? So we could just transfer this information to our chart as another way to help students see this leads to this sort of thing. So again, what I find interesting here is that this helps us look at what are some of the structures in an authentic text that show a function, that kind of carry out a function or realize a function, right? And sometimes they're not the ones that we always think of teaching. They're not the simple ones. So it's interesting to see how in an authentic text, something like that might be realized a little bit differently. Let's see, another, what I would say a next step might be after reading this, as a number of you have pointed out in the chat, this is sort of an explanation for a process, right? Describing a process.
Julia, sorry, I think you might have bumped your mic or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it was just
Okay,
2
good.
seconds, so we missed you.
My little thing is crooked, so I have to get it in exactly right. Thank you for letting me know. So a next step could be that after reading about a process like this, right, a text about a process, students could think about a process that they would like to describe. This is a scientific process. It wouldn't have to be a scientific process. It could be, something related to their own lives, but they could borrow some of these structures, whether it's some of the verbs, some of those, as structures that they can use. So good. Thank you, volunteers, for that. You can mute yourselves again. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oops. Okay. And I see some other interesting. So Jonathan has a semicolon as a transition device too. Good. We didn't notice that one. Sorry, I'm just seeing the chat on this page here now. Okay, let us move on to the next piece here. So here we're going to be looking at something called a participant process analysis. And let me say that this comes from this terminology comes from a perspective called systemic functional linguistics, which some of you may be familiar with. Don't worry about that if you're not. They look at, or this perspective looks at the process, the verb, as the core of a sentence. Okay, yeah, Halliday exactly said Hio. That's exactly right. And so the term that they use for a verb is a process. And those can be basically they can convey 4 kinds of ideas. They can convey actions. So things like run, jump, protest, create, right? Where somebody is doing something. They can be saying processes, things like, again, say, tell, yell, whisper. They can be thinking or feeling processes, decide, believe, hear, or they can be relating processes, which you may be familiar with the term like linking verbs. It's that sort of thing. So be, have, seem, appear, things like that. Okay, so processes are sort of at the core. And then there are people and things that participate in that process, and those are called participants. So in traditional grammar, we call those basically subjects and direct and indirect objects, right? So, jump, well, who jumps? I jump. I am participating in that action of jumping, so I am a participant. And then another term is that again comes out of this is circumstances. So, it's the idea that a participant does a process in certain circumstances. right? So those are basically, circumstances are basically adverbials that tell us where, when, why, how, things like that. Okay, so when we do a participant process analysis, it can really help to break down really complex sentences and help us and help our students to see really who does what to whom, who says what to whom, who feels how are things related to each other. It can also help us to see the circumstances in which processes take place. And really interestingly, it can help us to see how the author or the speaker, if we're thinking about an oral text, how they position the participants. So this is a whole lot of stuff I've just thrown at you, but let's put this into practice. What I'd like you to do is in the text handout, if you could read texts B and C. So I'm going to just put that up here too, so you can see, whoops, if you didn't download this, okay? B and C, both of those. And I'd like you to, as you're reading, think about, in terms of the content of these two, what's the same and what's different in terms of the content? So again, we'll take about 2 minutes to read, and then I'll ask you to put any thoughts in the chat. Okay, so when you've finished scanning through those, what similarities do you see in the content of these texts? What differences do you see? Okay, the first one evokes more recent events with more specific people. Good. One is more basic level vocabulary. Yep, the second is a little more advanced, right? So you're thinking about the language there. Both talk about women, right? Talking about history. Good. They're both basically about the same core content, women's right to vote. The first one's more specific, right? It sort of mentions that Alice Paul, that specific person. Okay. Yeah. All right, well, let's dive into these a little bit further. Let me go back over here. 1 second, I'm going to get my chat pulled up again so I can see if people are adding things. Okay. All right. So I've already done this participant process analysis just so that we don't spend a lot of time doing this. So let me explain what I've got here across the top of this chart. So the CONN is connector, and then we've got a first participant, which is generally going to be the subject. Then we've got the process is this PROC, that's the verb. The next participant is the direct object or the indirect object. Then we've got some circumstances. So you'll see that I've sort of done the first text on the left-hand side, and then the second text on the right-hand side. And so we can look at a couple different things here. If we look at, let's stick with the first text on the left-hand side here. So we have processes like worked to get, wrote, gave, walked, did, carried. Those are all action processes, right? And we can see that really all of these, all of the subjects, all of the first participants, it's really the same people, right? Many women, some women, others, other women, many, again, many women, one woman, they, right? And then we've also got one other process, wanted. So this one is more of a thinking, feeling process, okay? So in this text, okay, we'll just keep in mind those processes for a moment. And then let's go look over at the second text, okay? So here we have, again, a number of processes that are action processes. So began to fight, had fought, had never received, had to wait, okay? And then we've also got two connecting, two relating processes or linking verbs here were, and that one links to a feeling, we're pleased, we're angry. And then similar to the first text, our first participants, those are really pretty much all the same, right? Women in the US, the women who had fought, women, they. But let's think a little bit more deeply about those processes and think about how the authors of both of these, how are they positioning the women? I notice, for example, that in the first text, there's nothing that's said about women's responses, right? The second text we have, they were pleased, they were angry. We don't see that in the first text. I'll just open this up to anybody else. Do you have any other noticings about how the women are positioned differently in these two texts based on the verb choices that the authors have made? Feel free to unmute yourself. Or again, add something in the chat if you'd like to.
May I say something?
Please, please.
If you notice, the second one does include a lot of passive constructions.
Yeah.
So that makes the text a little bit, you feel a little bit away from the text or the information that is being provided, as opposed to the other one that is, let's say, using active voice.
Yep. And I would say in the second one, I'm wondering if you're thinking about we're pleased. Is that what you're thinking of as passive?
Exactly. And then I guess it was something else like we're pleased, was past.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like those two. And
yeah. Aida, go ahead.
And what you mentioned is in the first text, in text B, women look more aggressive. I mean, aggressive in the nice term.
Yeah.
That they are standing up for their rights. That there's a specific woman that takes other women with her, and they go to the White House and say, "Hey, listen, we are here." Meanwhile, in the other text, women sound very passive, like they just observe what's happening, and they feel angry, but it's just that. So they feel angry, they see what is happening. So mostly they are just observers.
Yes. Good. That, and the second, in the second text, the one on the right, that second from the bottom, they had not received, right? That's not passive, but it still has the idea of getting something rather than doing something, right? Good. Any other thoughts? But that, Aida, what you were saying is exactly what I was thinking too, that this kind of, the author is, again, positioning the women a little bit differently. We're talking about the same, overall, the same campaign that they were working on, but the women are portrayed differently in the second text than the first one.
Yes.
Let me go back to the full text again here. So again, I didn't put every single verb in that participant process chart, but just a number of them for you to see. So again, it's interesting that kind of analysis can help give us a little different level of understanding of the text. You can imagine too doing an analysis like this. I'm gonna switch back over to over here too. Doing an analysis like this with maybe a newspaper article or an opinion piece in a newspaper article, right? Even opposing people with different positions on the same news event, that are commenting on that. It would be interesting to see. I'm just thinking, anytime that politicians are involved, right? People are going to be either supporting or critiquing what they're doing. So it'd be interesting to see what language is used to convey the author's position about this, right? So it's not only things like, I agree with President so-and-so, I disagree with, but it's really looking a little bit more closely at some of the how verbs contribute to that, how the way processes and participants are written convey to that too. Good. Okay, let me just look at my notes here quickly too. Oh, I also just wanted to mention too, we really didn't spend a lot of time looking at circumstances here, but in certain kinds of texts, the circumstances are really important. If you think about a recipe, right? That might be another kind of authentic text that you might have your students look at. It's really important to know, do you put this pan on top of the stove? Do you put it in the oven? So, on top of, in, do you add it to some, do you add an ingredient before you do something? Do you add an ingredient after you do something? So some of those circumstances, again, become really interesting depending on the kind of text that you're looking at. So that could be, here we focused on processes, but you could also focus on circumstances, for example, too. All right, let's move on to our next tool. And here we're going to be talking a little bit about lexical chains. And, lexis has to do with vocabulary. So lexical chains are groups of related words that really refer to the same entity or the same concept in a text. And these could be, in some texts, there's a lot of repetition of the same, the same word, the same phrase over and over. Sometimes there's collocation, so words that are related, again, to the same concept, but that aren't exactly the same word, okay? Pronouns are another way of referring to the same entity, but again, using a different word to do that. Basically, what lexical chains do is they help the author to create a cohesive text, a text that hangs together nicely without too much repetition. And this is something that we might see a lot, particularly in lower level writers. Writing is just very repetitious vocabulary. And so we want to think about how can we help students, first of all, understand texts that use different words to refer to the same entity, but then also how can we help them to transfer that into their own writing then? So here I'm going to ask for a few volunteers again. It doesn't have to be the same people, but I need 4 volunteers. So again, if you want to put your name in the chat, if you'd like to volunteer. Again, this will be an easy one. Maria Lucia, great. Couple more people. Okay, Sergio, yeah, the lexical chains foster broader spread of neural activation. Oh, interesting. Okay, I want to hear more about that in a moment. Yeah. Anyone else want to volunteer? We can have some of the same folks volunteer too, if you'd like to do that. Sergio, sure. Okay, we'll just do Maria Lucia and Sergio. Great, and Aida. Okay, great. So let me go over here. And now we're going to be looking, actually, you can be reading text D. Okay, so you can, again, we'll just take a moment to read this on your own. This is from a text for, in the US, it would be for elementary level learners in a science class. Okay, so it's talking about different kinds of poisonous creatures. So again, take a moment to read that. All right, let's start. You'll see in this chart here, I've kind of identified 4 entities in this text that are pretty important to know about: the idea of snakes and teeth and venom and prey. Those are all important concepts in terms of understanding how snakes use venom, right? So let's start by, again, I'm gonna unfortunately be the only person who can mark this up here. But again, if we were really in a class and you were really learners, I might have you work on this even in small groups. We're gonna start out thinking about the snake, okay? Snake. So we're looking for different phrases, words, again, short phrases that refer to snakes or snake, okay? So I've highlighted one, larger ones, but again, any of my volunteers, just let me know what you see here.
Yeah, the pronouns it.
This one, right?
Yeah.
Same, this one.
And also it has long.
Yep, good. What
Also, there is a repetition.
And that is shots.
It shoots, yes, good. Yep.
Then it basically repeats the same word when it says this golden snake. Well,
Yes.
It gives another adjective, but it still says snake.
Right. It's referring to the same entity, isn't it? Oh, you know, I should probably highlight snake up here too, right? Anything else?
Well, snake appears twice
Snake
more. I believe.
shell. Well, snake.
The snake. Yep.
And the eyelash viper.
Yeah.
Probably?
Good. The eyelash viper. Good. Let's just see if there's any others there. Okay, good. Let's go to then teeth. Let's look at, see what we can find for teeth.
Sharp teeth.
Yep.
Fangs.
Yep.
Needle.
Yep.
Fangs again below.
Oh, maybe almost we could maybe put this whole thing here, right? A needle, a deadly one, maybe that whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Kind of talking about teeth. Oh, another fangs here, right?
Fangs.
Yeah. Okay, good. What about venom? Let's look at venom.
It repeats the word venom below.
Poison. Right?
Poison, yeah, where was that one? This
Poison.
one, right?
Yeah, poison.
This one, yep.
Yeah.
Good. Was there another? Oh yeah, makes venom. Yeah. Let's see. Good. I think that's it for venom, right? And then let's look at prey.
It's spray.
Yep.
Oh, the animal's heart.
Yep. The animals or the animal. Yep.
And meal.
And meal.
The
Exactly.
meal.
Exactly. Right. Good. So now that's I'm just curious, what do you notice? What responses do you have? What thinking about this for students, right? I'm thinking, for example, I might, as a student, not necessarily know that its meal means it's prey, right? So that's kind of a leap, right? Any others like that that you see that you think are, gosh, okay, that would be a little challenging for students?
Needle, maybe.
Needle and fang are the same, kind
fang.
of the same thing, right? I mean, it's one is a metaphor, really. Good. The animal, right? The animal, it's not, the animal is not the snake, right? In this case, it's the prey, right?
Yeah.
And just look at the many different ways that the snake is referred to, right? The eyelash viper, this golden snake. Well, how do I, is the golden snake, is that a new snake that we're talking about? It's not, but right. So that again is a bit of a challenge in this text. So helping students doing this sort of as a class, doing this sort of, let's look together to find how the author refers to these entities can be really helpful in understanding the meaning of the text. And then again, we're not going to do this, but we've got this chart here where we could write down what each of those sets of those chains are, right? And then again, that allows students to sort of have that with them as they're reading the text. I think this can also be helpful for learners, as I mentioned, as they're doing their own writing. So if you find that, of course, with lower level learners, of course, they're going to be doing a lot of repetition. That's, that's fine. But as we want to move them into more variety, helping them think about, okay, what's my text about? What are some of the key entities, the key concepts, key entities that I'm going to be talking about? What's some variety in the ways that I can talk about those things, right? So they might do a chart like this first, and then do their writing, kind of drawing on some different terms. Sergio, you had mentioned something about this and kind of broadening neural. Say a little bit more about that. I'm curious what you were thinking there.
Yeah, it's just that I've spent the last 5 or 6 years studying on my own. It has not been a formal thing, but I've been studying cognitive neuroscience. There are a lot of open courses on the internet that we can download. So I do know a lot about neural activation and that sort of stuff. I could share some links later on if you want me to.
Okay, interesting. But lexical chains, particular in regards to that. Yeah, I would be interested in knowing about that. Yeah, good.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, volunteers. All right. Let's go on to look at my time here really quickly. Okay, we're doing okay. So the final tool that we're going to talk about is attribute charts. And, attributes generally are qualities or characteristics that are ascribed to a person or a thing. And we're really thinking about attributes kind of generally here. Could be conveyed through certainly adjectives, could be conveyed through adverbs, could be conveyed through, again, processes, actions. Those can show attributes. And when we look at attributes, those can help us, again, to see the author's perspective, can help us to see maybe similarities and differences. If we're filling out an attribute chart about 2 different characters, it can help us to see similarities and differences between those characters, or maybe even the same character over time, how they change if we're reading a story, for example. If we're, the poison power text that we just read, that's part of a larger text that talks about spiders, snakes. I can't remember all the other different poisonous animals, but, again, we could have an attribute chart where we look for similarities and differences between those different poisonous creatures, right? And then, ultimately it helps us to find evidence too. And again, that's part of digging a little bit deeper into a text. So what I'd like you to do right now is, let me go back to this close reading, and we're going to look at the last text here, Ode to Dirt. I love the title of this poem. We so often ignore dirt, but this is an ode to dirt. So take a moment to just read that through and yeah. So maybe that gives you a little different appreciation for dirt than you may have had to start with. Okay, we're going to move to doing another activity with this text. 1 second here. Okay, so I think maybe we'll just stick with the same volunteers if that's okay with you, unless somebody else wants to join. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do, we've got our text over here on the left-hand side, and I'm sorry, I see that's a little not quite as clear, but hopefully you can make that out. The first thing I want us to do is to there's something in this, there's a change in this text, right? There's some sort of change that happens. There's a before and then there's an after. So we want to start out looking at verbs in the past and then verbs in the present. So let's look at verbs in the past first. And I'm going to use, I guess we'll do blue for verbs in the past. Okay. So again, I see slighted here as one. I'm going to underline. Actually, maybe I'll just do this with that one. What other past verbs do you see?
I thought
Yep.
for the author, but then where for the dirt.
Yep.
Had loved for the author.
Yep. Exactly. Gave. Yep. The sky gave them space.
Understood.
Yep. Yep.
Honored.
Yeah. Had honored. Yep.
Not recognized.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about ashamed. Was ashamed. I'm not so sure about that one, if it's before or after. But
yeah. I would say at least that is past, right?
Shame, I think it's that the adjective.
it looks like it's the moment when he realizes.
Exactly. Exactly. There's something about, okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yep. Looked is another one I see here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Made.
You know, that's right. I mean, I think it's a past participle at least. I think that one is probably more of a more adjective, acting more like an adjective, right? Have brought, that we'll consider that one more of a present.
Yeah.
Have fed. We got some, okay, let's look at some present ones now too. I'm going to use green for those.
I can see.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, sorry. The first one I'm seeing is here, are, right?
Yeah.
But then, okay.
You are again our democracy.
Yep. I'm sorry, I heard some other ones here that, can see, right?
Well, these are sort of imperatives, but I guess they count as present. Help us find.
Sure.
And as you mentioned, you have brought us forth, refers to what he feels now, that he has realized the importance of dirt.
Yep. Have fed. I think we can also, again, past participle there. We've got some futures there too. Good. I think, I am sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, good. That one's key, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Good. So we were saying then, okay, if we look at this, we've got sort of mostly past, right? And then we start to get into present. So somewhere around here, there's a change, right? Let's maybe use
there is
this.
a transition.
Yeah. Do you think it's this when I understood, maybe? Is that so? We'll sort of just.
Yeah.
It's not that it's completely, it's not that that's everything before. Everything before that red slash was before and everything after is after, but that's kind of the key moment, it seems to be. Okay. And then let's think about the author, looking at, okay, so I am sorry now, right? What did I do in the past? What were some things that that the author did in the past, or that the author is I slighted, right? Oops. Oh,
I thought that you were only the background for the leading characters.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of how I saw, or how the author saw the dirt, right? Just background, right? Sorry. There we go. Background. Let's see. But okay, so some things, I hadn't honored you, right? You, okay. hadn't recognized.
Mhm.
Okay, let's think about then, we might not be getting all of them, but again, just for the sake of time, we'll think about that. What about the author afterwards? What are some things that kind of describe the author afterwards? Maybe we can say ashamed.
Ashamed, yeah. I was gonna think.
Yeah, right,
Yes.
right, yep.
I can see us all made of
Yeah.
same basic.
Yep. Oh, right. And you know what I think is kind of interesting, I'm noticing here too. Let me get another little. There's kind of a sense of we're together, right? Like the author and dirt, people and dirt. What are some similarities you see across those, right? Made of the same basic materials, right?
Yeah.
What else? Cousins. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Okay. All right. So we could go on and find some more things here, but let's if we look at what we've got on the chart here, this again, kind of in a graphic way, helps us to see what was this relationship like before. What's this relationship like after? Right? Helps us to dig in a little bit more to what the author is saying. So if we were going to, personally, I have always found it a little bit hard to say what a poem means, right? If you were going to talk about what this poem means, what would you say? What's the main idea in this poem?
We are all made of stars dust.
Good. We're all made of stardust, and we don't always recognize it. But once we see it everywhere, right?
And it's a vindication of dirt.
Yes, exactly. Right. Even that word dirt, dirty, right? It's got a bad connotation to it, but really an ode to dirt. It's kind of
and it's a recognition to his overlooking this precious material.
Exactly. Good. Thanks again, volunteers, for helping out with this. Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, that's sort of the tools, the 4 tools that I wanted to show you. So again, just to refresh your memory again, the ones that we looked at. So we looked a little bit at language functions. We looked a bit at that process participant circumstance analysis. We looked at lexical chains. We looked at this idea of attribute charts. So we're going to move into breakout rooms now. And what I'd like you to do is just briefly introduce yourselves. I think, let me look at the time here. Yeah, let's do about 12 minutes or so, something like that. So introduce yourselves briefly, where you're from, kind of the context that you teach in a little bit. Think about, is there a takeaway that you have from the presentation? What's something that you might try with your students? And again, let me say, I certainly don't expect that these texts that I've used would be texts that you would be applicable to your situation, but is there some idea that's sparked for you? And also share together any questions that you have about the tools, okay? So thanks, Mark, for putting that in there. Yeah. So Mark, when you're ready, if you want to break us into small groups, and then again, we'll get back together and do a little bit of debriefing. So
perfect. So everybody, when you get to the breakout rooms, let's really take advantage of what Zoom has to offer in making these webinars interactive. And if you're having any trouble with connections or anything like that, don't leave, just hang out, and then you'll be brought back here to the main room for the final part of the presentation, okay? So I'm opening the rooms now, and we'll take 12 minutes, as Julia said.
All right. So we're going to do another one of these wait for it activities, just really briefly. So think about what's a new thought, a new inspiration that you're taking away from today. So again, type it in the chat, but don't press enter yet. So we'll take a minute to think and type in the chat. And then when I say go, you can hit enter. Okay. So we'll just take a minute to do that. All right. You can go ahead and enter your thought into the chat. Good. Good. Great. Yeah, Catherine, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, let me just make that possible.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Catherine, you can unmute yourself now.
Sorry, in the break room, I couldn't participate because my microphone just didn't work. But I really like the idea. I'm still student, so I really like the idea to work with authentic materials. And I had some courses where our professors taught us about that one. And I really like the idea. There are many activities that we can do with the students. And also the analysis character that you present is a good way for the students to analyze a text. So I really like this topic that you were presenting today. So I take all this PD talk for my future as a teacher. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. Esther, what about you? Yeah.
Hi, I have a quick question. It seems like the authentic materials, it's mostly referred to as academic materials, for example, scientists or newspapers. But I mean, how authentic is that? Is it possible to use some other authentic material that has a little bit more slang in it? Maybe it's a little bit more culturally common, because I mean, not it's that there's different types of authentic, but it seems like it's focused more academically and not necessarily more the day-to-day materials.
Yeah.
So I was wanting to see what you thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'll say too is my coming from my context of working with teachers who are getting an ESL license to teach in public schools, that's why most of my examples come from kind of that more academic context. But certainly I think we and all the examples that I gave really were written, right? You could also do close listening, right? So you could use oral texts, which might contain more of that slang and things like that too. You probably want to have a written transcript of them just to be able to look a little more closely at the language too, but that would certainly be an option. Yeah, and I think I think certainly, magazine articles, things like that, blog posts, again, there's a lot of those functions that we talked about would be evident in a more kind of more informal texts that are a little more informal as well too. So yeah, good question. Good. Well, I'll just open it up for other questions. Let's see. Yeah, Jonathan. Yeah.
I think I have kind of an answer for what was being asked before. And I teach reading skills at a university level. And one of the things that I like to experiment with my students is non-linear texts. And that continues being authentic material. Find an infographic. Find, for example, like the diagram of the evolution of rocks, like the things that you had over there. And then you can also have like lots of graphs and stuff like this that can definitely boost higher order thinking skills among students. So again, the text does not have to be necessarily something as nice as a poem like this one about dirt, but it could be something else that is produced, let's say, by native speakers.
Yeah. So one thing you're saying one thing that's sparked by what you're saying, Jonathan, is that a number of folks have done work of applying some of these concepts of like participant, process, circumstance analysis to visuals, right? So what, how are the participants, the people, the items in the picture, how are they positioned relative to each other, right? What are they shown doing? So it's just interesting to think about how some of these same kind of analyses can be applied to visuals as well too. That's kind of a whole different, that would be a whole different conversation and discussion, but yeah, thanks for that reminder. Good. Other questions that folks have? And I'm kind of trying to scan the chat here too. Whoops.
And I've been spamming that, Julia, so sorry, you might have to scroll up a bit.
Yeah, yeah. That's okay. Good. All right. Well, I will say thank you so much for attending, for your participation, for your good questions and thoughts. I'm just going to go ahead and put my email. My email is at the top of the handout, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in here too. Just in case anyone wants to reach out with further questions or opportunities to connect. So
is this going to be posted somewhere?
Yes, we're going to post the recording in the community of practice site, which part of the spam that I've been posting here in the chat. It's got a link to a feedback survey that we would like everyone to fill out. It'll just take a few seconds. And we always share the results of that feedback survey with our speakers as well, so they get a sense of how you felt about the presentation. And there's the second link is for the registering for the community of practice. And then if you're already a member, there's a link to log in. So as of Monday, we'll have the recording edited and posted up there. And any of the materials that Julie, well, the presentation and the handout as well will be accessible there.
Appreciate it.
Sure. Was there any other final comments or questions for Julia? If we missed anybody? You're getting some applause from Claudio.
okay.
All right. Well, we want to
so
say
much.
We want to say thank you, Julia, for taking the time to meet with us this afternoon. It was a pleasure. I know that everyone got a lot out of this session, and it felt like a lesson. It felt like we were part of a class. Honestly, it was a different pace, and I think we all really appreciated that. So again, on behalf of Centro Cultural and the PD Talks, we want to thank you very much for participating. And anyone who's got their cameras on, if you can give a big thumbs up to Julia or say a little comment in the chat, that will be really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much.